ballots, and many of them tell us they have not actually made up their mind. So this debate, when you think about it tonight, may be the last best chance for the candidates to make their case to South Carolina and Super Tuesday voters.
And CBS News is proud to bring you this debate along with our co-sponsors. They are the Democratic National Committee and the Congressional Black Caucus Institute, a nonpartisan organization committed to educating voters and training political leaders.
And we are partnering tonight also with Twitter, so you at home can participate in this debate. How do you do that? Send us your questions for the candidates using the Twitter hashtag #DemDebate.
Now, here are the rules for the next 2 hours. When you are asked a question, you will have 1 minute and 15 seconds to answer and 45 seconds for follow-ups. So let's begin. Senator Sanders, we haven't had a national unemployment rate this low for this long in 50 years. Here in South Carolina, the unemployment rate is even lower. How will you convince voters that a Democratic socialist can do better than President Trump with the economy?
Well, you're right. The economy is doing really great for people like Mr. Bloomberg and other billionaires. In the last 3 years, billionaires in this country saw an $850 billion increase in their wealth. But you know what? For the ordinary American, things are not so good. Last year, real wage increases for the average worker were less than 1%. Half of our people are living paycheck to paycheck. 87 million Americans have no health insurance or are underinsured. 45 million people are struggling with student debt. 500,000 people tonight are sleeping out on the street, including 30,000 veterans. That is not an economy that's working for the American people. That's an economy working for the 1%. We're going to create an economy for all, not just wealthy campaign contributors.
Mayor Bloomberg. Mayor Bloomberg, I'll let you respond to that. Do you think Senator Sanders' economy would be better for America than President Trump?
I think that Donald Trump thinks it would be better if he's president. I do not think so. Vladimir Putin thinks that Donald Trump should be president of the United States, and that's why Russia is helping you get elected, so you'll lose to him.
Let me tell Mr. Putin, okay, I'm not a good friend of President Xi of China. I think President Xi is an authoritarian leader. And let me tell Mr. Putin, who interfered in the 2016 election, try to bring Americans against Americans. Hey, Mr. Putin, if I'm president of the United States, trust me, you're not going to interfere in any more American elections.
Senator Warren?
We know what Russia wants. It's chaos.
So look, the way I see this is that Bernie is winning right now because the Democratic Party is a progressive party, and progressive ideas are popular ideas, even if there are a lot of people on this stage who don't want to say so. You know, but Bernie and I agree on a lot of things, but I think I would make a better president than Bernie. And the reason for that is that getting a progressive agenda enacted is going to be really hard, and it's going to take someone who digs into the details to make it happen. Bernie and I both wanted to help rein in Wall Street. In 2008, we both got our chance, but I dug in, I fought the big banks, I built the coalitions, and I won. Bernie and I both want to see universal health care, but Bernie's plan doesn't explain how to get there, doesn't show how we're going to get enough allies into it, and doesn't show enough about how we're going to pay for it. I dug in, I did the work, and then Bernie's team trashed me for it. We need a president who is going to dig in, do the hard work, and actually get it done. Progressives have got one shot.
That lying snake of a woman. Holy crap. Are you serious, guys? Bernie's team trashed her for starting the CFPB? In what way?
They don't have a political party. They want chaos. And chaos is what is coming our way. I mean, look, if you think the last 4 years has been chaotic, divisive, toxic, exhausting, imagine spending the better part of 2020 with Bernie Sanders versus Donald Trump. Think about what that will be like for this country. And meanwhile, folks at home from South Carolina to South Bend are trying to figure out what any of this means for us. Because it's right that there is a progressive majority, an American majority, that wants to see real change, wants to see wages go up and go up faster than the cost of health and saving for retirement. But also there's a majority of the American people who I think right now just want to be able to turn on the TV, see their president, and actually feel their blood pressure go down a little bit instead of up through the roof.
No.
We have an opportunity to set a
Mr.
different
Steyer.
tone.
Mr. Steyer.
Bernie Sanders' analysis is right. The difference is I don't like his solutions. I don't believe that a government takeover of large parts of the economy makes any sense for working people or for families. I think that what we need to do is to present an alternative that includes a vibrant, competitive private sector. But we all know unchecked capitalism has failed. The answer is not for the government to take over the private sector, though. The answer is for us to break the corporate stranglehold on our government and have the government work for the people again.
Vice President Biden?
Well, let me just finish, because we need to have an alternative to Donald Trump. I'm talking about doubling the minimum wage, cutting taxes by 10% for everybody who makes less than $250,000, and creating over 4.5 million good-paying union jobs. Donald Trump stinks. He's incompetent as a steward of the American economy. We have to show that we can create a growing, prosperous economy that works for American working people.
Mr. Steyer, thank you. Your time's up. Vice President Biden?
You know, we talk about progressive. Let's talk about being progressive. Walking distance here is Mother Emanuel Church. 9 people shot dead by a white supremacist. Bernie voted 5 times against the Brady bill and wanted a waiting period. No, let me finish. And waited a waiting period of 12 hours. I'm not saying he's responsible for the 9 deaths, but that man would not have been able to get that weapon with the waiting period had been what I suggest until you are cleared. In addition to that, being progressive, he thought Barack Obama, he wanted a primary.
I might be wrong, but the Brady bill didn't cover the fucking gun show
And in
loophole
fact,
anyway.
the president was weak,
that's a load
and
of
our
shit.
administration was, in fact, not up to it. Look, folks, let's talk about progressive. Progressive is getting things done, and that's what we got done. We got a lot done.
Senator Sanders, your response?
You know, Pete mentioned, I'm hearing my name mentioned a little bit tonight. I wonder why. And maybe, you know, Pete mentions what the American people want. I will tell you, Pete, what the American people want, and Joe, what the American people want. They don't want candidates to be running to billionaires for huge amounts of funding.
All right, let's clear this up once and for all.
Pete has gotten funding
you've got people
from
believing
over
something that is
50
false.
billionaires.
This
Joe,
needs
I
to be
think, has
cleared up.
gotten a little bit more. What the
All right.
American people want, by the way, and a lot of the issues we'll be discussing tonight are issues I raised 4 years ago. Raising the minimum wage to a living wage, $15 an hour, making public colleges and universities tuition free, and finally doing what every other major country on earth does, guaranteeing health care to all people as a human right through a Medicare for all single-payer system.
I can't allow this to stand because it's just not true. Senator Sanders has got people believing something that is untrue about my campaign. The idea that most of my campaign is funded by billionaires.
I didn't say that, Pete.
50 people. All right. In Charleston alone, just in Charleston, over 2,000 people have contributed to my campaign. That means the dollars that have come to my campaign just from Charleston is more than the dollars that have come from the 50 people that you mentioned. Grassroots contributions are the lifeblood of my campaign. In fact, I shouldn't miss the opportunity. If you're watching right now and you support my campaign, go to PeteForAmerica.com and chip in. And if you're watching right now and you're a billionaire, I will raise your taxes. But if you'd like to defeat Donald Trump, please go to PeteForAmerica.com and donate the legal maximum of $2,800 if you're a billionaire.
All right, Mayor Buttigieg.
Okay.
Vice President Biden, I want to bring us to another topic. We're in South Carolina. It's the first primary with a significant black voting population. Your numbers appear to be slipping with black voters. And I'm wondering if you could respond about why that is happening to you at this particular time.
Well, first of all, the latest poll I saw, my numbers, I'm still 15 points ahead. The latest poll.
Yes, you're correct.
But look.
But Senator Sanders is in striking distance of you. You are within the margin of error in this state.
Well, it depends on which poll. Look, I've earned the vote. I've worked like the devil to earn the vote of the African American community, not just here, but across the country. I've been coming here for years and years, creating jobs here, making sure that the port, for example, that employs 1 in 11 people, we put $500 million in our administration just into this county. We've created jobs for people. The people know me. My entire career has been wrapped up in dealing with civil rights and civil liberties. I don't expect anything. I plan to earn the vote. I'm here to ask. I'm here to earn it. But folks, I intend to win South Carolina, and I will win the African-American vote here in South Carolina.
Mr. Biden, will you continue if you do not win South Carolina? You have said that South Carolina will determine the outcome of this presidential race. If you don't win South Carolina, will you continue in this race?
I will win South Carolina.
All right, sir. Mayor Bloomberg, I'd like to bring you in this conversation. I want to ask you about a question that impacts the black and brown community. You've apologized for stop and frisk repeatedly. What exactly are you apologizing for?
We let it get out of control, and when I realized that, I cut it back by 95%. And I've apologized and asked for forgiveness. I've met with black leaders to try to get an understanding of how I can better position myself and what I should have done and what I should do next time. But let me tell you, I have been working very hard. We've improved the school system for black and brown students in New York City. We've increased the jobs that are available to them. We've increased the housing that's available to them.
But what more
we have
can
programs
you do about
like
this issue, Mr. Mayor, to put people's fears and skepticism to rest?
I think
it continues to follow you.
No, well, that's because it's in their interest to promote that. But if you talk to the people in New York City, I have over 100 black elected officials that have endorsed me. A lot of them are in the audience tonight. And I've earned the respect of people in New York City. I was the mayor of the largest, most populous city in the United States for 12 years. And people will tell you it's a lot better city today. It is safer for everybody. The school system is better. The budget's under control. We've done the things that people need in New York City for all ethnicities.
Mayor Buttigieg? Mayor to mayor, you've certainly had your issues with the black community as well. Do you think the New York City's implementation of stop and frisk was racist?
Yes, in effect it was, because it was about profiling people based on their race. And the mayor even said that they disproportionately stopped white people too often and minorities too little. And I'm not here to score points. I come at this with a great deal of humility because we have had a lot of issues, especially when it comes to racial justice and policing in my own community. And I come to this with some humility because I'm conscious of the fact that there's 7 white people on this stage talking about racial justice. None of us have the experience, the lived experience of, for example, walking down the street or in a mall and feeling eyes on us, regarding us as dangerous without knowing the first thing about us just because of the color of our skin. None of us have the experience that black women have had that drives that maternal mortality gap that we are all rightly horrified by, of going into a doctor and being less likely to have your description of being in pain believed because of your race. Since we don't have the experience, the next best thing we can do is actually listen to those who do.
I know, wait a second. I know that if I were black, my success would have been a lot harder to achieve. And I know a lot of black people that if they were white, it would have been a lot easier for them. That's just a fact, and we've got to do something about it than rather just demagogue about it.
Senator Klobuchar, was the way that the mayor implemented stop and frisk racist?
Yes, and I think that what we need to do, instead of just reviewing everything from the past, is talk about where we're going to go forward. Martin Luther King once said that we are all tied in a single garment of destiny, and that what affects one of us directly affects all of us indirectly. So when there is racism in the criminal justice system, then we need to fix it. And to me, that means sentencing reform like the First Step Act and extending that to the states with the Second Step Act. It means equal opportunity, because if we don't pass Representative Clyburn's bill out of South Carolina here to invest in impoverished communities, we're never going to get to that single garment of destiny. And we also need to do something about childcare, about making sure we increase the minimum wage, and then finally, voting. While we are all sitting here debating, Wisconsin has kicked hundreds of thousands of people off of their voting rolls.
Thank you,
Georgia
Senator.
kicked 100,000 off. As president,
Thank you.
I will get voting rights to be a reality
Thank you,
for
Senator
everyone.
Gale.
Senator Warren, I'm coming to you. I want to direct this question to you because Mayor Bloomberg has said he got in this race late because he doesn't believe that any of you on stage can beat Donald Trump. You said Mayor Bloomberg is not the safest candidate. He is the riskiest candidate. What did you mean by that?
I mean that Mayor Bloomberg, let's think of it this way. We're here in Charleston, and you know who's going to be in Charleston later this week is Donald Trump. He's going to be here to raise money for his buddy, Senator Lindsey Graham. Who funded Lindsey Graham's campaign for re-election last time? It was Mayor Bloomberg. And that's not the only right-wing senator that Mayor Bloomberg has funded. In 2016, he dumped $12 million into the Pennsylvania Senate race to help re-elect an anti-choice right-wing Republican senator. And I just want to say, the woman challenger was terrific. She lost by a single point. In 2012, he scooped in to try to defend another Republican senator against a woman challenger. That was me. It didn't work, but he tried hard. I don't care how much money Mayor Bloomberg has. The core of the Democratic Party will never trust him. He has not earned their trust. I will. And the fact that he cannot earn the trust of the core of the Democratic Party means he is the riskiest candidate standing on this stage.
All right, Senator Warren, thank you. Mayor Bloomberg, would you like to respond? Mayor Bloomberg?
I have been training for this job since I stepped on the pile that was still smoldering on 9/11. I know what to do. I've shown I know how to run a country. I've run the city, which is almost the same size, as bigger than most countries in the world. I am not the least. I'm the one choice that makes some sense. I have the experience, I have the resources, and I have the record. And all of the sideshows that the senator wants to bring up have nothing to do with that. When people hired me to run New York City 3 times in an overwhelmingly Democratic progressive city, they elected me again and again.
Mr. Vice President?
I was mentioned in this.
No.
I'd like to respond.
Go ahead, Senator.
He called me out by name in this
Okay.
and referred to what I talk about as a sideshow. You know, this is personal for me. When I was 21 years old, I got my first job as a special education teacher. I loved that job. And by the end of the first year, I was visibly pregnant. The principal wished me luck and gave my job to someone else. Pregnancy discrimination, you bet. But I was 21 years old.
This has already been proven to be a lie, you guys. This has already been proven to be a lie, and she's really telling this story again, even though she's already been called out on it. Like, I'm amazed at how fucking terrible these candidates are.
The way that Mayor Bloomberg
never
is alleged
said
to
that.
have said to one of his
come on.
pregnant employees. People want a chance to hear. People want a chance to
Senator.
hear from the women who
I
have
never
worked
said that.
I want to allow the
and
mayor
for the
an
record,
opportunity
if
to
she was a
respond.
teacher in New York City, she would never have had that problem. We treated our teachers the right way, and the unions will tell you exactly that.
Well, Mayor Bloomberg,
Then
Senator Warren has raised.
Let us have the women have an opportunity to speak. The Bloomberg corporations and Mayor Bloomberg himself have been accused of discrimination. They are bound by non-disclosures so that they cannot speak. If he says there is nothing to hide here, then sign a blanket release and let those women speak out so that they can tell their stories the way I can tell my story without having
Thank you. I
to fear that
Nora.
we're going to be sued by a billionaire.
Thank you. We have a number of issues discussed tonight, but I want to give the mayor an opportunity to respond because she has raised concerns about women in your workplace. At the last debate, you said some of your female employees might not have liked some of your jokes. Did these women take your jokes wrong, or were you wrong to make the jokes?
Probably wrong to make the jokes. I don't remember what they were, so I assume if it bothered them, I was wrong, and I apologize. I'm sorry for that. But what happened here is we went back 40 years, and we could only find 3 cases where women said they were uncomfortable. Nobody accused me of doing anything other than just making a comment or two. And what the senator did suggest was that we release these women from the non-disclosure agreement. I did that 2 days later, and my company has said we will not use non-disclosure agreements ever again. The senator has got it, and I don't know what else she wants us to do.
Oh, I'll be
We're
clear.
following exactly what she asked to do.
I'll tell you exactly
and the
what I
trouble
want you to
is, with this senator, enough is never enough for what this. I'm going to start focusing on some of these other things. We just cannot continue to relitigate this every time. We did what she asked. And thank you. We've probably made the world better because of it. And by my company renouncing using these, we probably changed, hopefully, the corporate landscape all across America.
But if you get nominated, we'll be relitigating this all year.
Do what I asked.
Senator Warren, that is a very serious charge that you leveled at the mayor.
Yes.
You told a woman to get an abortion. What evidence do you have of that?
Her own words.
And Mayor Bloomberg, could you respond to this?
I never said it. Period. End of story.
Look.
Categorically never said it. When I was accused of doing it, we couldn't figure out what she was talking about. But right now, I'm sorry if she heard what she thought she heard or whatever happened. I didn't take any pleasure in that. And we've just got to go on, but I never said it. Come on.
What I asked the mayor to do is to do a release of all people who have
We
discrimination
are doing that, Senator.
claims. Look, who have
We want to get to
discrimination
we want to get to the we want to get to the
mayor.
issue. We want to get to the issue of electability and the ideological difference within the
Okay.
Democratic Party. Senator Sanders, the cost of your agenda. Yesterday, you released information about how you will pay for your major proposals, but not all of your details are clear. You've proposed more than $50 trillion in new spending. You've said Medicare for All will
Over a
cost
10-year
$30
period.
trillion. But you can only explain how you'll pay for just about half of that. Can you do the math for the rest of us?
How many hours do you have?
2.
The answer
That's
is,
the
well,
problem.
No, it's not the problem. All right, let's talk about Medicare for all. I'm sure you're familiar with a new study that just came out of Yale University, published in Lancet magazine, one of the prestigious medical journals in the world. You know what it said? Medicare for all will lower healthcare costs in this country by $450 billion a year and save 68,000 lives of people who otherwise would have died. What we need to do is to do what every other major country on earth does, guarantee health care to all people, not have thousands of separate insurance plans which are costing us some $500 billion a year to administer. Our plan, we have laid out options all over the place. One of the options is a 7.5% payroll tax on employers, which will save them substantial sums of money. Another
Bernie,
tax-
let me respond to this.
Senator, ask me a
Does the
question.
math add up?
No, the math does not add up. In fact, just on 60 Minutes this weekend, he said he wasn't going to rattle through the nickels and the dimes. Well, let me tell you how many nickels and dimes we're talking about. Nearly $60 trillion. Do you know how much that is for all of his programs? That is 3 times the American economy, not the federal government, the entire American economy. The Medicare for All plan alone, page 8 clearly says that it'll kick 149 million Americans off their current health insurance in 4 years. That is true. As one prominent Democrat once said, we should pay attention to where the voters of this country are, Bernie. That prominent Democrat was Barack Obama a few months ago. And I think that's what we should do. They are not with you on spending nearly $60 trillion. What I think we should do is make things more affordable, nonprofit public option, make sure we're paying for long-term care better, take on the pharmaceuticals like you and I have done together, and do something for the people of
Thank you,
America
Senator
instead of a
Klobuchar.
bunch of broken promises that sound good on
Talking
bumper
about me.
stickers.
Mr. Steyer,
I think we're talking about
We'll get to you,
Medicare.
Mr. Sanders.
Let's talk about it.
Can I say
Steyer.
something?
Look, first of all,
Bernie, let me go. Let me go.
Tom, I think she was talking about my plan, not yours.
I think we were
All right.
talking about math, and it
No,
doesn't take
no,
2
it's-
hours
well,
to
let's
do the
talk
math,
about
because
math.
let's talk about
Let's
what it
talk
adds up to.
about
Well, we
math.
don't. Let's talk about
Let's
math
talk
indeed.
about math.
Okay,
If
so
we
here's
do
the math.
nothing,
No, here's the
which
math.
Excuse me, can I respond to
doing
the attack?
nothing is what will happen.
Senator Sanders, you
I
were
was
allowed a
called on
quick
forward
response, and
candidate.
then we would like to allow the other
Alienates
candidates.
Moderator,
Senator
guys.
Sanders? Senator Sanders?
Moderator, is it my turn?
This
Senator
helps a lot,
Sanders,
doesn't
you
it?
have been name-checked. You are allowed to respond.
Okay. What the Health and Human Services have said in analyzing healthcare costs, what recent Yale study has said is that your program would cost some $50 trillion over a 10-year period. We would continue to pay, in some cases, 10 times more for the same exact prescription drugs. What every study out there, conservative or progressive, says Medicare for all will save money. Ours will cost about $45 billion, not $60 trillion.
No,
But
I was
like-
talking, Bernie, I was talking
I gotta
about,
respond to that.
I was
It's
my turn.
talking
Have you called on me
Yes.
before?
We would like,
program-
Senator
Since the
Sanders,
senator
we would like to
characterized my
bring
plan,
Mr.
I'd like to-
Steyer in
So
on this
let me say this.
conversation. Mr. Steyer, please.
I was talking about all your
conversation-
programs.
Excuse me, Amy. This conversation shows a huge risk for the Democratic Party. We are looking at a party that has decided that we're either going to support someone who's a Democratic socialist or somebody who has a long history of being a Republican. And let me say that I got into this race because I wanted to fight for economic justice, for racial justice, and to make sure we had climate justice for the American people. And I am scared. If we cannot pull this party together, if we go to one of those extremes, we take a terrible risk of re-electing Donald Trump.
Thank you, Mr. Steyer.
And that is something, I still have some time, and let me just say this.
Thank
That
you,
is a
Mr.
risk that
Steyer.
will hurt the American people in a way that none of us on this stage should be willing to risk.
Thank you. Let's keep this topic going, Mayor Pete.
So let's do some math. Senator Sanders at one point said it was going to be 40 trillion, then it was 30, then it was 17. It's an incredible shrinking price tag. At some point has said it is unknowable to even see what the price tag would be. Now there are new numbers going. I'll tell you exactly what it adds up to. It adds up to 4 more years of Donald Trump, Kevin McCarthy as Speaker of the House, and the inability to get the Senate into Democratic hands. The time has come for us to stop acting like the presidency is the only office that matters. Not only is this a way to get Donald Trump reelected, we got a House to worry about. We got a Senate to worry about. And this is really important. Look, if you want to keep the House in Democratic hands, you might want to check with the people who actually turned the House blue. 40 Democrats who are not running
41.
on your platform. They are running away from your platform as fast as they possibly can. I want to send those Democrats back to the
Vice
United States
President
House.
Biden.
Let's listen to them
Vice
when they
President
say that
Biden,
they don't want to be out there
Look,
defending
Mayor
Senator
Buttigieg.
Sanders.
Thank you, Mayor
Whoa,
Buttigieg.
whoa.
Vice President Biden, please.
I guess the only way you do this is jump in and speak twice as long as you should. Here's the deal. Look, a guy is a friend of mine down here named
Biden is such a rules nerd. He's always bringing up it's my time is up, and I don't get any turn to speak. Like, quit crying and actually do something about it.
On the end of this platform, he in fact bought a system that was a private prison system after he knew that, in fact, what happened was they hog-tied young men in prison here in this state. They, in fact, made sure that in Georgia they did not have health care for the people who were being held. They, in fact, went on and he said, after he knew that, he bought it, and then he said he was proud of his accomplishment. You talk about what we're talking about with Bernie. Bernie, in fact, hasn't passed much of anything. The fact of the matter is...
But I get to answer that. I get to answer.
He's known as the Amendment King. Bernie Sanders has gotten more amendments onto bills than any other person in Congress. Biden's lying.
Fact of the matter is...
Or at the very least, mischaracterizing his record.
Look at what's happening here. We have to win the Senate back. And by the way, I went into all of those races that got 41 new Democrats. The majority of them are supporting me for president.
And Mr. Vice President, I have to allow... Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Mr.
Mayor, you're allowed to respond.
I bought stock in a prison company thinking they'd do a better job, and I investigated and I sold it.
Okay.
You
Stop.
You knew when you bought it they'd done that.
I get to answer this question. And in fact, since then, I've worked to end the use of private prisons in my home state, and we've ended it. I've started a bank to support black ownership of businesses, women ownership of businesses, and Latino owners of businesses, because this financial service industry is prejudiced. I have worked tirelessly on this, and you know I'm right. You wrote the crime bill.
Where we
that
come
you
from,
called
that's called
the
Tommy
Joe
Come
Biden
Lately.
There are other
crime bill
people here.
that put hundreds of thousands of young black and Latino
Not
men
true.
in prison.
Okay. Let me say
did.
something.
Thank you.
There's something
Not
going
true.
on here.
Mr.
I
Steyer.
have worked
Thank
for
you.
racial justice
Thank you, Mr.
completely,
Steyer.
and that is an
Thank you,
absolute
Mr.
unfair
Steyer.
statement.
All I know is
Tommy Come Lately.
if we spend the next 4 months
Okay.
tearing our party apart, we're going to watch Donald Trump spend the next 4 years tearing our country apart.
Look,
So my argument here is that we need to get back to what's happening right now. We have a clear choice of who's going to lead this party. And I am the only one in the New Hampshire debate, when asked if we had a problem with a socialist leading the ticket, that raised my hand. I like Bernie. We came in together to the Senate, but I do not think that this is the best person to lead the ticket. And if you want to talk about getting things done and make a comparison, according to Vanderbilt University in Tennessee, last Congress, I was the most effective Democrat in the U.S. Senate on 15 metrics. Bernie and Elizabeth were in the bottom half. It matters. It matters if you
Okay.
can actually get things done.
Gail.
It is not just who talks the best, who actually gets things done. And especially with the African American community, there have been a lot of broken promises. And I think having someone that keeps their promises and follows through and is going to get things done for this people matters. And that's why I ask for your support.
Mayor Bloomberg, please.
Let's just go on the record. They talked about 40 Democrats. 21 of those were people that I spent $100 million to help elect. All of the new Democrats that came in, put Nancy Pelosi in charge, and gave the Congress the ability to control this president, I got them. Number two, when you talk about money, let's put this in perspective. The federal budget is $4.5 trillion a year. We get $3.5 trillion in revenue. We lose $1 trillion a year. That's why the federal budget deficit is right now, the debt is a $20 trillion going up to 21. We just cannot afford some of the stuff people talk about. But if you let me finish. If you keep on going, we will elect Bernie. Bernie will lose to Donald Trump. And Donald Trump and the House and the Senate and some of the state houses will all go red, and then between gerrymandering and appointing judges for the next 20 or 30 years, we're going to live with this
Mayor Bloomberg,
catastrophe.
thank you. I will allow Senator Sanders a quick response, and
Thank
then
you very
Senator
much,
Warren.
Laura.
Senator Sanders, a quick response, and then
Thank you very much. Mayor Bloomberg has a solid and strong and enthusiastic base of support. Problem is, they're all billionaires. Now, if you look, on the other hand, of the last 50,
What the fuck was that? Why was the crowd geeking out so hard about that obviously true statement?
if you look at battleground states like Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, polling just
The
done
polls
this
aren't the
Sunday,
election.
I beat Trump. And if you want to beat Trump, what you're going to need is an unprecedented grassroots movement of black and white and Latino, Native American and Asian people who are standing up and fighting for
Thank you.
justice.
Can anybody,
That's what our movement
anybody
is
in this
about.
room imagine moderate Republicans going over and voting for him? And you have to do
Absolutely.
that or you can't win.
No,
Thank you,
that
Senator
is-
Warren.
That is the problem. And that is that a progressive agenda is popular, Mayor Bloomberg, and for everyone on this stage. We talk about how to build a future. That's what matters. I talk to people in selfie lines every day who tell me about the importance of getting real help on health care. It's why I also have a way to pay for health care that doesn't raise taxes on middle-class families. But it's so much more than that. As Democrats, we need to speak to the future we can build together. We need to speak of the prosperity we can build together. How about a wealth tax in America? Because with a 2-cent tax on just the top 0.1%, we have a chance to invest in universal child care for every one of our babies, to really level the playing field, put
Thank you.
$50 billion into historically
Thank you,
black colleges and universities, and start closing the racial wealth gap by canceling student loan debt for 43 million
Senator.
Americans. We need to talk about our aspirations, our hopes. This is a moment
Senator.
to choose hope over fear.
Senator, thank you.
This is our moment.
Senator, thank you. We have to take a quick break. When we come back, the Democratic presidential debate continues right after this, only on CBS.
Alright, so they're just gonna let everybody fucking lie and mischaracterize all of Bernie Sanders' plans, and he's just gonna sit there and get screamed at because he's in the lead. Meanwhile, he has to. First, hold on, pause. I think the most dramatic part of this whole debate, after the up to the first commercial break at this point, is the fact that when Bernie Sanders dissed Bloomberg for having nothing but billionaire support, the crowd started booing him. Like, was that booing Bernie Sanders or booing Bloomberg? I'm not sure, but it can't possibly be booing Bernie for telling the truth. Bloomberg ain't got shit. He's just being a paternalistic prick with years and years and years of negative video of him talking all kind of trash on poor folk. So, yeah, I mean, if we're talking about somebody who can't unify people and win against Trump, it's definitely Bloomberg. If we get that man as a nominee, we can resign ourselves to a century of oligarchy and nothing but billionaire presidencies. Because he's created a blueprint for the rest of them to follow if they want to just steal the election from here until, for a whole nother 3 generations. Like, this is unbelievable. Bernie better come back swinging on these fucking fools, man. I know that he's usually nice and cordial, but, like, clearly they got knives out for him, and, the moderators aren't going to even hold anybody to the truth, so you just gotta take the stage, man. Fucking Buttigieg, like, what the hell is he doing, man? Like, he doesn't even have a shot at this anymore. Why is he still up there trying to disrespect Bernie and his goddamn healthcare plan? And then, of course, Warren, like, mischaracterizing her plans, acting like any of them are good enough to actually solve these problems. They're all half measures. That's the whole fucking lane that she's running in, is being somewhere between Biden and Bernie, which is, again, more half measures. And the issue with half measures, especially when you're making those promises in an election, is you can't have that as your starting point in a negotiation when it actually comes time to passing it. That's how we lost the public option during the fucking Obamacare debate in the first place. It's because he was already capitulating to the right before he even started the negotiations. So, people need to lay this out as not, policy promises, but also theory of change. Lay it out. Explain it to people that, like, this is why it's not going to work the way they think it's going to work. If you start out negotiating for crumbs, you're never going to get the whole loaf of bread. You have to go for the whole loaf and then whittle yourself down from that. Like, what the hell is with this crowd, first of all? Like, who the fuck do they get to sit in these crowds? I'd really love to know, like, how they fill these seats. Because that's a lot of people in there, and a lot of them seem to be cheering on some shit that doesn't make any sense. Like, do they go after low-info people, or are they all campaign workers? Like, it's all suspect to me, man. I'll turn the debate back up once it's live again. Oh, speak of the devil. Quite literally.
Gail King with Norah O'Donnell joining us now in the question here in Charleston, South Carolina. Our CBS News colleagues, the A-Team, Bill Whitaker of 60 Minutes, Chief Washington Correspondent, that's Major Garrett, and Margaret Brennan, moderator of Face the Nation. We're going to begin with you, Vice President Biden, for this part. Just across the street, as you mentioned at the top of the debate, is a theater where 9 people were shot and killed inside the Mother Emanuel Church. We all remember that day back in 2015. And every day in our country, over 100 people die from gun violence. You all have plans, I know, on this stage to address the gun crisis, but Congress has not been able to pass a major gun legislation in a quarter of a century. And just think about this. In those 25 years, we've had Columbine, Newtown, Parkland, Las Vegas. We could go on and on. Vice President Biden, I want to start with you. Why should anyone have faith that you're the one who can get this done now?
Because I'm the only one that ever got it done nationally. I beat the NRA twice. I got assault weapons banned. I got magazines that could not hold more than 10 rounds in them. I got them eliminated, except we had a thing called an election with hanging chads in Florida, and it was not reauthorized. In addition to that, I passed the Brady bill with waiting periods. I led that fight. But my friend to my right and others have, in fact, also given to the gun manufacturers absolute immunity. Imagine if I stood here and said we give immunity to drug companies, we give immunity to tobacco companies. That has caused carnage on our streets. 150 million people have been killed since 2007 when Bernie voted to exempt the gun manufacturers from liability. More than all the wars, including Vietnam, from that point on. Carnage on our street. And I want to tell you, if I'm elected and I'm coming for you and gun manufacturers, I'm going to take you on and I'm going to beat you. I'm the only one who's done it.
Yes,
That's why we've got to change what
being able to
Washington
dig
can
in
deliver.
and talk about what really it's going to take to get something done. I've been in the Senate when I've seen gun safety legislation introduced, get a majority, and then doesn't pass because of the filibuster. Understand this. The filibuster is giving a veto to the gun industry. It gives a veto to the oil industry. It's going to give a veto on immigration. Until we're willing to dig in and say that if Mitch McConnell is going to do to the next Democratic president what he did to President Obama, and that is try to block every single thing he does, that we are willing to roll back the filibuster, go with a majority vote, and do what needs to be done for the American people.
Okay,
Senator,
but
we're going to stay on this topic and allow Senators.
Beat Mitch McConnell.
Understand this. Many people on this stage do not support rolling back
Senator.
the filibuster.
Thank you.
Until we're ready to
Senator.
do that, we can't.
Senator,
make
I want to
real
allow
change.
Senator Sanders to respond because you've gone after the insurance industry, you've taken on pharmaceutical companies, and you've taken on big tech. Why did you vote repeatedly to give gun manufacturers a pass?
Well, you know, Joe has voted for terrible trade agreements. No. Joe voted for the war in Iraq. My point was, I have cast thousands of votes, including bad votes. That was a bad vote. I have today a D- voting record from the NRA. 30 years ago, I likely lost a race for the one seat for Congress in Vermont because 30 years ago I supported a ban on assault weapons. 30 years ago. Right now, my view is we need to expand background checks, end the gun show loophole, and do what the American people want, not what the NRA
Okay, but wait
wants.
a second.
Senator,
Here's
here's
one
one
thing.
The opposition to the filibuster is
time out.
not a discretion
Wait,
from a long
I think
time
you
ago.
recognize me. Thank you. I have a 6 million person organization around this country, Moms to Men Action, in every town. We have put background checks. We've got background checks in 20 states. So you can do it. It's Congress that can't seem to do it, and I don't know why we think they're going to do it. The vice president voted for a death bill and supported the NRA, and certainly Senator Sanders has supported the NRA. But we can do this. We just got to stop talking about it.
But the
They
way
want
we do
both
it,
ways.
the way we do it is having someone leading the ticket from a part of the country that we actually need the votes. So I have long supported the assault weapon ban. I am the author of the bill to close the boyfriend loophole that says that domestic abusers can't go out and get an AK-47.
I wrote that law.
Along with, you didn't write that bill.
I
wrote that bill.
I wrote the bill, the Violence Against Women Act, that
Okay,
took
you did that.
out of the hands of people who abused
we'll
her.
have a fact check look
no,
at this.
let's look at the fact
my
check.
goodness.
The only
Okay.
thing that the boyfriend loophole was not covered. I couldn't get that covered. You, in fact, when you were as a senator, tried to get it covered, and Mitch McConnell is holding up on his desk right now, and we're going to lose the Violence Against Women Act across the board.
Okay, so if I could finish. I have the bill. Anyone can check it out to close the boyfriend loophole. Also, to close the Charleston loophole is another bill that's out there, universal background checks. But let me say how we win this. We've got to win in the middle of the country. And while everyone talks about winning rural areas, suburban areas, I'm the only one up here with the receipts that has actually repeatedly, while being for the assault weapon ban, won in Republican congressional districts over and over again, including Michelle Bachmann's district. So having someone that can lead the ticket, that can bring people with her, is the way you get gun safety legislation. I look at these proposals and say, do they hurt my Uncle Dick in the deer stand? They do not. And so coming from a proud hunting state and still being able to pass this legislation
Senator Klobuchar,
is going to
thank
be
you.
the
We
key.
want to allow many people to get in on this topic. Mayor Buttigieg.
I'm definitely on board with the part about sending up somebody from the middle of the country. But I want to come back to this question about the filibuster, because this is not some long ago bad vote that Bernie Sanders took. This is a current bad position that Bernie Sanders holds. And we're in South Carolina. How are we going to deliver a revolution if you won't even support a rule change? We are in the state. We are in the state where Strom Thurmond used the filibuster to block civil rights legislation repeatedly. No less a Senate traditional figure than Harry Reid has called for it to go. It has got to go because otherwise Washington will not deliver. I was in high school when the Columbine shooting happened. And I remember everybody in Washington saying, never again. We'll never let this happen again. And then a second school shooting generation has now been produced. Shame on us if we allow there to be a third.
All right.
And also, in terms of
Mayor
making the
Buttigieg.
case, I think it
Time's
wouldn't
up,
be a
sir.
bad idea for somebody to illustrate from the perspective of a veteran why the kinds of weaponry, anything remotely like what I trained on in order to go serve in a war zone, has no business being sold anywhere near an American
All right.
school or church or neighborhood.
All right, Senator Sanders, please.
30 years ago, supported a ban on assault weapons. Mike Bloomberg has started a very good organization, Moms Demand Action. Congratulations. They have credited me with gun sense, as you know.
Yes, we did.
Furthermore, it is my view that the time is now, and Joe made this point. Look, at the end of the day, we need to rally the American people. Here is the good news. Because of all these disgusting and horrific mass shootings, the American people now understand that we must be aggressive on gun safety, not be dictated to by the NRA. And I am proud that I have a D- voting record from the NRA. If elected president, it will get worse than that.
All right, Mr. Steyer, please.
Look,
Mr. Steyer.
it isn't a question of the American people deciding that we have too much gun violence. Everyone in America knows we have too much gun violence. The problem we have is that corporations have bought Washington, D.C. The gun manufacturers own the Senate of the United States. So even though more than 90% of Americans want mandatory background checks on every gun purchase, we can't get it through the Senate. So the question you have to ask yourself is, how do we change the Senate of the United States in a material way? And there are two things. That's why I am for term limits of 12 years for every congressperson and senator, to change who's in charge, to get rid of Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham and Ted Cruz. But I am also, Senator Sanders is right. We need to win a huge victory across the board.
All right,
Democrats
Mr.
need
Steyer.
to go to the grassroots. I built one of the biggest grassroots organizations in the United States.
Your
The way
time's
to
up,
win at the
sir.
grassroots is tell the truth
time's
and
up, sir.
organize.
Bill
That's what it's
Whitaker?
going to take in 2020.
Your time's up, sir. Bill Whitaker.
Let's talk about education. South Carolina's schools score in the bottom half of the national assessment. Black students here consistently score worse than white students. Mayor Bloomberg, a key element of your response to failing schools in New York City was a dramatic increase in public charter schools. As president, would you pursue that same strategy and seek to expand charter schools nationwide?
I'm not sure they're appropriate every place. I can only tell you in New York, they provided parents with an alternative to send students to them. We had the charter schools are mixed in with the non-charter public schools because our charter schools are public schools as well. They've helped each other. I saw a statistic the other day. When I came into office, 0 New York City schools were in the top 25 of the state. When I left, 23 out of 25 were from New York City. We've cut the gap between the rich and the poor. We've made an enormous difference in all of the options that parents have. I raised teachers' salaries by 43%. I put an extra $5 billion into our school system. I value education. It is the only ways to solve the poverty problem is to get people a good education. And rather than just talk about it in New York, we actually did it.
Senator Warren.
So this is one thing where a president can make a big difference all by herself. And I'm going to start with my Secretary of Education. My Secretary of Education will be someone who has taught in public school. My Secretary of Education will be someone who believes in public education. And my Secretary of Education will believe that public dollars should stay in public schools. One more thing. My Secretary of Education will believe that it is time to get rid of high-stakes testing. We need to support our children. But look, we want to build a future in this country. We build a future by investing in our children. I've got a plan to put $800 billion new federal dollars into our public schools. Education is not free. We must invest in the future of our children.
Senator Sanders.
This campaign, our campaign is about changing American priorities. Instead of giving tax breaks to billionaires, we're going to have high-quality, universal child care for every family in this country. Because the psychologists tell us 0 to 4 are the most important years of human development. We are going to triple funding for low-income Title I schools because kids' education should not depend upon the zip code in which they live. We're going to make public colleges and universities tuition-free through a tax on Wall Street speculation, and we're going to move to make certain that no teacher in America earns less than $60,000 a year. We want great teachers.
Mayor Buttigieg.
Look, the best thing that we can do to support public education is to support public educators. I'm a little biased because I'm married to one, and I get an education about education every day I come home. I have seen how teachers are being expected to dip into their own pockets to furnish their classrooms. Teachers are being expected to handle the mental health challenges that their students are facing because we don't have an adequate mental health system to support kids. And now some politicians, because they aren't willing to face the need for common sense gun law, are expecting teachers to somehow transform themselves into highly trained armed guards when there's a threat to a classroom. We have to show not only with compensation, but with support for the profession overall, our regard for those who are educating our kids. And yes, that means a Secretary of Education who will support teachers. It also means investing.
Thank you, Mr.
I'm proposing an education access board that would show that we are going to honor our teachers a little bit.
Pass this on to Major.
Candidates, good evening. Candidates, good evening.
People across this country are being crushed by student loan debt. This is an issue we need to talk about.
And that's what my plan would do through the education.
As we all know, the political conversation in our country is interactive. And because of our partner, Twitter, this debate is no different. So I want to put a question from Twitter to you, Senator Klobuchar. This is from Casey Pennington. How will your policies address and ensure affordable housing and education equity for minimum wage workers?
Thank you. This is one of the first times we've talked about housing, and I put forward an extensive policy. I think when I've looked at this, both in my job in local government and in the Senate, one sure way we can make sure that kids get a good start is if they have a roof over their head and a stable place to live. So the way you do that is, first of all, taking care of the Section 8 backlog of applicants. There are literally hundreds of thousands of people waiting. And I have found a way to pay for this and a way to make sure that people get off that list and get into housing. Secondly, you create incentives for affordable housing to be built, and third, to help people pay for it. And I want to make clear, given South Carolina and the rural population as well as urban, that this isn't just an urban problem. It's a big urban problem, but it's also a rural problem where we have housing deserts and people want to have their businesses located there, but they're not able to get housing. So for me, it's building a coalition And I actually like to get these things done. And the way you do it is by building a coalition between urban and rural so you can pass affordable housing
Senator
and
Warren,
finally
hold on
get
one
it done.
second,
This is
'cause I
a
wanna-
point
I
where
wanna-
we need to talk about race, though.
I
It
understand.
is not enough to talk about housing
we just
neutrally
speak up when
and
we want to?
just be
Is that the
race
idea?
blind. It is important to recognize the role that the federal government played for decades and decades in discriminating against African Americans having an opportunity to buy homes. That's redlining. And while Mayor Bloomberg was blaming the housing crash of 2008 on African Americans and on Latinos, in fact, I was out there fighting for a consumer agency to make sure people never get cheated again on their mortgages. I have a housing plan, and what it has
Senator
in
Warren,
it
thank you.
specifically is
Senator
a
Warren,
piece to
thank you.
deal with the effects of redlining. We can no longer pretend that everything is race neutral. We have got to address race consciously what's happening in this
Mayor
country.
Bloomberg,
and
please, we were
fight.
going to ask you about this. I want to give you a chance to respond because in addition to what Senator Warren just said on Twitter, she called you a liar and a borderline racist because of what you said about redlining.
Yes, I'm sorry, but unfortunately she's misinformed on redlining. You can go back and look at the record. I fought against it before 08, the crisis, during 08, and after that. Redlining is not the problem with the mortgage market, but it was a problem for the communities where it was done, and we stopped that. Let me also say, because since I have the floor for a second, that I really am surprised that all of these, my fellow contestants up here, I guess would be the right word for it, given nobody pays attention to the clock. I'm surprised they show up because I would have thought after I did such a good job in beating them last week that they'd be a little bit afraid to do that. But let me just say, when you're talking about affordable housing, we created 175,000 units of affordable housing in New York City. And I listen to them, that they're in Congress, and they say they can't get it done, can't get it done. But if you change something like the president, they would. No, you have to learn how to work with both sides of the aisle, and then you can get stuff done. I did it in New York City. I got the Republican state Senate to vote for gay marriage virtually before anybody else in this country. You can work across the aisle. You just have to know how to deal with people.
Mayor Bloomberg, thank you very much. Back to you, Bill.
Vice President Biden, black men earn 73 cents for every dollar earned by white men, are about twice as likely to be unemployed, 5 times more likely to be incarcerated, conditions that ripple across black families and have endured during both Democratic and Republican administrations. How do you convince black voters that you can change years of inequities?
2 ways. Number one, my entire life I've been involved with the black community. I was a public defender. I worked in the projects. I came along, and the first thing I did as the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, extended the Voting Rights Act, eventually for 25 years. And I've been deeply involved. And my first effort I had as a councilman was doing away with redlining in the county. The way we do this, we got to help them create wealth. And that's why we double the amount of money that is available for young entrepreneurs, and black entrepreneurs are as successful as any other group of people in the country. We go from $1.5 billion to $3 billion, taking $30 billion off the sidelines. That's how you create wealth. Secondly, I provide for the opportunity for first-time home buyers to be able to have a $15,000 tax credit, so they can get the mortgage at the front end and be able to keep it. Thirdly, I go after those people who are involved in gentrification, because what's happening is we're moving people out of their neighborhoods in ways that, in fact, make no sense. They're being bought out of things. You cannot find a place to live. And thirdly, I make sure that with regard to housing, we allow people, look, right now, if you live in a black neighborhood and you have the same exact house as the guy across the street in a white neighborhood has, your house is valued significantly less than the white. The same exact house. We've got to deal with the institutional racism.
Thank you, Vice President. Mr. Vice President.
I know how you cut me off all the time, but I'm not going to be quiet anymore, okay?
Mr. Steyer.
Every single policy area in the United States has a gigantic subtext of race.
Yes.
We're talking about education, we're talking about criminal justice, we're talking about housing, we're talking about loans. I started a bank to basically correct the injustice in the financial services industry. Basically to make loans to black-owned, Latino-owned, and women-owned businesses. We've supported over 8,000 affordable housing units. But more than that, I believe I'm the only person on this stage who believes in reparations for slavery. Something happened. We should have a formal commission on race to retell the story of the last 400 plus years in America of African Americans, of systematic legal injustice, discrimination, and cruelty, but also of 400 plus years of contribution in terms of building the United States of America and leading the United States of America from a moral standpoint.
Let me ask
and I challenge everyone.
Senator Klobuchar, next question. New topics. Senator
I don't know where you got the impression.
If you could honor the rules of the debate. Thank you. Senator Klobuchar, I'd like to change topics and ask you. Rural areas have populations who are older, sicker, and poorer than non-rural communities, and they have to travel farther to get medical help when they need it. Expanding coverage is going to be useless if there are no providers to go to. So how would you ensure that there is available health care in rural areas?
People aren't always aware, I know you are in South Carolina, about how much poverty there is, particularly child poverty in rural areas. So the answer is one size doesn't fit all. And one of the ways you do this, right now we have something called critical access hospitals, so they're designated for rural areas. And actually I am leading the lead Democrat on a bill to extend that, to have other types of hospitals like emergency rooms in rural areas be covered. The other issue is we don't have enough personnel. And so that's where we get to this education plan. And I don't agree with some of my colleagues here about putting hard-earned taxpayer money into rich kids going to college. What I think we need to do instead is look at what our needs are in our economy. We're going to have 1 million openings for home health care workers, particularly in rural areas that we don't know how to fill. We're going to have over 100,000 openings for nursing assistants. We're not going to have a shortage of sports marketing degrees. We're going to have a shortage of plumbers and nurses. So putting incentives in place with how we do loan payback, making 1- and 2-year degrees free, and then, of course, creating loan...
Klobuchar is like sniffing glue or something in the commercial break. She's not even making any sense at this point. Like, how does anybody buy her bullshit?
From other countries that study in our medical schools to stay and serve in rural areas. We need to expand that.
The floor is yours. Would you like the same question?
Yeah, so when I was born, there was no difference in your life expectancy if you were born in a rural area or a city. Now the gap is the biggest it's been in a generation, and that is particularly affecting black rural families in places like South Carolina. We're seeing hospital closures right and left, and we're seeing them in particular in states where Medicaid was not expanded, something that is hurting black and poor white families and is largely the result of racial voter suppression. See, all of these things are connected: housing, wages, the ability to get anything meaningful done on criminal justice reform. All of these things are going to be harder to deal with as long as black voices are systematically excluded from political participation, which is happening on everything from the purging of voter rolls to the closing of voting locations. And that harms everybody. It's why in my Frederick Douglass plan for comprehensively dealing with these issues, part of the core of it is a 21st century voting rights act.
Senator Sanders.
Yeah. Very proud working with Congressman Jim Clyburn, South Carolina, that we increased funding for the Community Health Center program by $11 billion as part of the Affordable Care Act, which now provides for 9 million Americans access to primary health care, dental care, mental health counseling, and low-cost prescription drugs. In that bill, we also put $2 billion into a program which would provide debt forgiveness for doctors, nurses, dentists. We have a major dental affordable crisis in this country, to make sure that they are practicing in underserved areas. The advantage of a Medicare for All health care program, because it's not driven by profits for the drug companies and the insurance companies, we will have health care for all people in all parts of this country.
But in order for any of that to happen, it has to pass. We're talking about a plan that goes beyond even what they do.
We're going to go to Mayor Bloomberg. We're going to change topics. Mayor Bloomberg, as mayor of New York, you declared war on obesity. You banned trans fats from restaurants, and you tried to do the same with large sugary drinks. So if you become president, will you push those policies on the national level as well?
Well, I think what's right for New York City isn't necessarily right for all the other cities. Otherwise, you'd have a naked cowboy in every city. So let's get serious here. But I do think it's the government's job to have good science and to explain to people what science says, how to take care of themselves and extend their lives. We are a country where there are too many people that are obese. We should do something about that. But just take a look at what happened with smoking. We did ban smoking in New York City in public places, restaurants, offices, and that sort of thing. And it has spread across America, across Europe, across Latin America, even into places in the Middle East and into the Far East. It has saved an enormous number of lives. So it just goes to show if you have good public health, then you can do things. And one of the great problems today, you read about the virus. What's really happening here is the president fired the pandemic specialists in this country 2 years ago. So there's nobody here to figure out what the hell we should be doing. And he's defunded Centers for Disease Control, CDC, so we don't have the organization we need. This is a very serious thing. As you see, the stock market's falling apart because people are really worried, and they should be. We don't have anybody to respond.
We're going to talk about that in our next segment. Before I leave you, are New Yorkers living longer because of your policies?
There's no question about that.
All right,
Before I left, life expectancy in New York City had grown by 3 years during our 12 years in office, such that when I left, it was 3 years greater than the national average.
All right. Vice President Biden, please. Vice President Biden.
Look, one of the things we have to do, we have a thing in the Defense Department called DARPA, special operation thing to find out all the things we have to deal with to make us safer. They came up with the internet. They came up with the whole idea of stealth technology and the rest. We have to I'm going to do the same thing at the National Institute of Health. We're going to focus at least $50 billion over the first 5 years on focusing on obesity, diabetes, Alzheimer's, and cancer. And we're going to make that investment because no one else is willing to make that investment. We can, in fact, find cures if we make the investment. And we can get that done. The American people support it. Even Republicans will support it. We have to focus on extending life, saving life, and making people, put them in a position to be able to live longer and more securely.
All right, Senator Biden, thank you.
Give people health care.
Senator Klobuchar, Senator Sanders wants to legalize marijuana on day one of his presidency and is promising to expunge the record of anyone who has been arrested for possession. As a former prosecutor, is that a realistic promise?
Well, it is realistic to want to legalize marijuana. I want to do that too. And I also think you need to look back at people's records. And you maybe can't do it on day one, as he said. I think you want to have a process that you go through because there's too many people that have things on their records that have stopped them from getting jobs. I think a lot of what we also need to do is to make sure that when we do this, that we have money for treatment. And it's not necessarily because of marijuana, it is because of things like opioids and the like. And that's why one of the first plans I put out was for treatment. Because if you want to make the criminal justice system work, you don't want to have repeat customers, and you want to help people to get off of drugs. And the way you do that is with drug courts. The way you do that, by the way, is with my proposal for a clemency board in the White House so that you don't have a president that pell-mell gives pardons to his buddies and to white-collar offenders, but that instead you have a set process that you use that's fair and is outside of the Justice Department and while giving their advice.
All right, thank you, Senator
Can I
Klobuchar.
respond
Mayor
to that?
Bloomberg, I'd like to get your thoughts on this because you have called marijuana another addictive drug that we've never done research on.
Look, the first thing you do is we should not make this a criminal thing if you have a small amount. For dealers, yes. But for the average person, no, and you should expunge the records of those that got caught up in this before. Number two, we're not going to take it away from states that have already done it. But number three, you should listen to the scientists and the doctors. They say go very slowly. They haven't done enough research, and the evidence so far is worrisome before we get all our kids, particularly kids in their late teens, boys even more than girls, with this may be damaging their brains. Until we know the science, it's just nonsensical to push ahead. But whatever, the cat's out of the bag. So some states have it. You're not going to take it away. Get rid of the, decriminalize the possession.
Senator Sanders, you were name checked.
All right, look, you're right. We have a criminal justice system today that is not only broken, it is racist, got more people in jail than any other country on earth, including China. And one of the reasons for that is a horrific war on drugs. So I do believe that on day one, we will change the Federal Controlled Substance Act, which, if you can believe it, now equates heroin with marijuana. That's insane. We're going to take marijuana out of that and effectively legalize marijuana in every state in the country. What we are also going to do is move to expunge the records of those people who are arrested for possession of marijuana. And I'll tell you what else we're going to do. We're going to provide help to the African American, Latino, Native American community to start businesses to sell legal marijuana rather than let a few corporations control the legalized marijuana market.
All right, Senator Sanders, thank you. We've passed the halfway mark.
Can I respond to this? I wrote the bill to set up drug courts.
All right, thank you, Vice President Biden. We will get back to you. The CBS News Democratic presidential debate will continue right after the break.
Wow, okay, so this debate has been fucking terrible so far. Like I said, I can't stand Biden. I don't understand how he's still in the race. Every time he speaks, he's like a petulant child. He's like, nobody's talking to me. It's not fair. I'm going to say that I'm the one who did that. I'm the one who did that 30 years ago. Like, he wants to own all the potentially good parts of his record while not mentioning any of the years of terrible things that man has done. Keeps talking about drug courts and the Brady bill and all this other bullshit, but nobody wants to bring up the fact that he wrote the bankruptcy bill. That means that none of us can claim bankruptcy on student loan debt. He was known as the senator from NBNA, a credit card company in Delaware. Speaking of Delaware, it's a tax shelter for businesses, so they incorporate there without having any actual physical operations there. Yeah, Biden is trash. Klobuchar is just a rambling joke. He's just constantly going on about nonsense. Again, with more nibble around the edges policies, talking about like, oh, this is what we can do to raise life expectancy and this and that. You know what raises life expectancy faster than anything? Universal health care. There's no more beneficial thing to life expectancy than giving people the ability to see a doctor when they need to, or actually afford to go to their checkups. And and I don't understand why Bernie doesn't bring up his disability plan ever. Like, look, we might be a small portion of the population, especially those who are like actually activated and get out to vote, but it'll show empathy and it'll show that you've thought of something that no one else has brought up, and if anything happens, it's going to be someone like Elizabeth Warren piping up to say that she does a little, she does improve the disability system, but by not as much. So like you're immediately finding a route to be ahead of everyone else. In, I don't feel like they gave him enough time to speak about the true costs of his plans and, how we can rearrange what the government spends money on in order to meet those costs, and how, their supposed cost for universal health care doesn't account for how much money is already spent in the private sector for health care. They just lob shit at him and then give him 15 seconds to respond. And like I said, I don't know who's in those fucking, how those seats got filled, but there's way too much cheering for Bloomberg and booing every time Bernie even says anything. For someone who's second in the polls in South Carolina and right behind Biden, it certainly doesn't fucking seem that way when you hear the crowd. And I really think Bernie stepped in shit by trying to answer his vote on the on not making gun manufacturers responsible for deaths or whatever, by saying that Biden also signed bad bills and stuff. Like, that's not a good argument. Two wrongs doesn't make a right is not a it's not a good argument, because then you're deflecting responsibility. He should have just came out, right away and said, hey, that was 30 years ago and my opinion has changed on that. The political environment was different, where people were at was different. But, check my record on literally everything else in the last 40 years. Is a guy allowed to be right or allowed to be wrong a few times if he's right on everything else? Like, he should have just owned it and put it, and framed it with his record as a whole as being like one blemish on an otherwise stellar record in fucking 40, 50 years in government. Like, I feel like they're really going to make hay out of that one moment. And again, because I think he might have the least speaking time of anyone on this stage at this point for being second in the polls in South Carolina and number one nationally. Like, why do they feel like they can just fucking ignore him the whole time?
Welcome back to the CBS News Democratic Debate. Each of you is campaigning for the role as Commander-in-Chief. Well, you will command 1.3 million U.S. troops and be responsible for protecting America's national security. There are also 53,000 here in South Carolina. You said, Senator Warren, you said you wanted to bring home all troops from the Middle East, and then you walked that back to say you want to bring home combat troops.
I do.
How does that protect America's national security?
Look, a president's first job, is to keep America safe. And an important part of that is to have a strong military. All three of my brothers served in the military, and I understand how much the military sacrifices, how much their families sacrifice, and how much they are willing to put on the line. That means that we have a sacred responsibility to them, and that is not to use our military to solve problems that cannot be solved militarily. We are not winning in Afghanistan. We are not winning in the Middle East. What we need to do is we need to use all of the tools in our toolbox. We need a strong military. We also need a strong State Department. Those are our eyes and ears on the ground. They are our front lines in diplomacy. We need a strong economy and to work worldwide on that economy, and we need strong alliances. We need to know the difference between our friends and between dictators who would do us harm, and we need to be nicer to our friends than to dictators. We need not to cut and run on our allies. We need an approach that keeps us safe by using all of the tools in a measured way.
Mayor Bloomberg, voters have not heard much about your foreign policy views. Would you pull all combat troops out of the Middle East?
No, you want to cut it back as much as you can, but I think if we learn something from 9/11, people plan things overseas and execute them here. We have to be able to stop terrorism, and there's no guarantees that you're going to be able to do it, but we have to have some troops in places where terrorists congregate, and to not do so is just irresponsible. We shouldn't be fighting wars that we can't win. We should go to war only as a last resort. Nobody argues with that. But this is a dangerous world, and if we haven't learned that after 9/11, I don't know what's going to teach us what to do. We have to do something, and I think the budget that we, what are things that I've seen recently convinced me that the military today is better prepared than they've been in an awful long time, and that the monies they are spending on the war weapons we need for the next war and not for the last, a common mistake that they're not making now. They're doing a good job.
Mayor Buttigieg, I'd like to go to you as the only veteran on stage. Can you weigh in on this?
Well, the first time I ever set foot in South Carolina, it was stepping off the bus that brought me to combat training near Fort Jackson. And that was to get ready to go to Afghanistan, where I saw that one of the things that kept me safe, just as sure as my body armor, was the fact that the flag on my shoulder represented a country that was known to keep its word. Our allies and our adversaries knew it. The president has torn that to shreds. And so the first thing we've got to do is restore the credibility of the United States. Second thing we got to do is make sure that we not only have the intelligence capabilities, and I guess I disagree with the mayor, I don't think we need to have ground troops anywhere terrorists can gather, because terrorists can gather anywhere in the world. But we do need intelligence capabilities and specialists on the ground. But what good is that if you have a president who won't listen to them? Right now, some of the biggest threats that we face are not only things like counterterrorism, but issues like global health security and the coronavirus that rely on the ability to listen to scientists, listen to your own intelligence, and coordinate with an international community that this president has alienated because his idea of a security strategy is a big wall.
I know it goes fast, but a minute 15 is really a long time. So we'd ask respectfully if you would all please try to keep to the time.
Good idea.
Senator Klobuchar, good idea, right, Mr. Vice President? Senator Klobuchar, today, as we were coming over here today, I promise, Mr. Vice President, we are going to get to you today. I
Keep
promise.
promising me that, but you haven't done it yet.
I've never broken a promise.
Well,
Senator
let's get to it.
Klobuchar,
Why don't
as
we
we
let
were
me
coming
answer?
over today, there was breaking news from the CDC about the coronavirus. And so far, there have been 2,700 deaths globally. And so far in this country, there have been no deaths. But the CDC says this: it's not a matter of if the virus will spread here, but when. The question to you is this: would you close the borders to Americans who have been exposed to the coronavirus in order to prevent an outbreak here in this country?
Well, what we have to do is make sure that we have treatment for those Americans and that they are in a quarantine situation. We don't want to expose people, but we want to give them help. And I would agree when Mayor Bloomberg said that this president has not invested like he should have in his budget. He tried to cut back on the CDC. He tried to cut back on the international organization that would coordinate with the rest of the world. He hasn't yet really addressed the nation on this topic. I would do all of that. But I want to take this out of politics right now and talk to the American people, because this is so serious. I'm not going to give my website right now. I'm going to give the CDC's website, which is cdc.gov, so that people keep checking in and they follow the rules and they realize what they have to do if they feel sick, and they call their health care provider. Because many doctors are saying it's just a matter of time before we're going to start seeing this here. And I think the answers, as president, what would I do? I would better coordinate throughout my presidency to be ready for the next pandemic and to prepare for this one. I would have better relations with our allies, and I would support, because I know the vaccine is out there in the head of some kid right now in school in Columbia, South Carolina, or Houston, Texas, and it's investing in education, so we are ready to lead again in the world.
Mr. Vice President, we reached a turning point today with the CDC, warning schools that they must prepare, that they might have to close. Members of the Trump administration saying we don't have enough medical masks if necessary. What would you do?
What we did with Ebola, I was part of making sure that pandemic did not get to the United States, saved millions of lives. And what we did, we set up, I helped set up that office in the presidency, in the president's office on diseases that are pandemic diseases. We increased the budget of the CDC. We increased the NIH budget. We should, if our president today, and he's wiped all that out, we did it. We stopped it. And the second thing I point out to you is that what I would do immediately is restore the funding. He cut the funding for CDC. He tried to cut the funding for NIH. He cut the funding for the entire effort. And here's the deal. I would be on the phone with China and making it clear. We are going to need to be in your country. You have to be open. You have to be clear. We have to know what's going on. We have to be there with you and insist on it and insist. I could get that done. No one up here has ever dealt internationally with any of these world leaders. I'm the only one that has.
Senator Sanders.
In the White House today, we have a self-described great genius. Self-described. And this great genius has told us that this coronavirus is going to end in 2 months. April is the magical day that this great scientist we have in the White House has determined. I wish I was kidding. That is what he said. What do we have to do? Whether or not the issue is climate change, which is clearly a global crisis requiring international cooperation, or infectious diseases like coronavirus requiring international cooperation, We have to work and expand the World Health Organization. Obviously, we have to make sure the CDC, the NIH, our infectious departments are fully funded. This is a global problem. We've got to work with countries all over the world to solve it.
Senator, we're going to stay on the topic of foreign affairs. Margaret Brennan.
Thank you, Nora. Mayor Bloomberg, you've said that President Xi Jinping of China is not a dictator and that he is responsive to his constituents and that the U.S. must cooperate with Beijing. How far does that go? Would you allow Chinese firms to build critical U.S. infrastructure?
No, I would not. And I think the Chinese government has not been open their press. The freedom of press does not exist there. Their human rights record is abominable, and we should make a fuss, which we've been doing, I suppose. But we make no mistake about it. We have to deal with China if we're ever going to solve the climate crisis. We have to deal with them because our economies are inextricably linked. We would not be able to sell or buy the products that we need. And in terms of whether he's a dictator, he does serve at the behest of the Politburo, of their group of people. But there's no question he has an enormous amount of power. But he does play to his constituency. You can negotiate with him. That's exactly what we have to do. Make it seem that it's in his interest and it's in people's interest to do what we want to do. Follow the rules, particularly no stealing of intellectual property. Follow the rules in terms of the trade agreement.
China has not stolen intellectual property. They reverse engineer our shit because we have a manufacturer over there so that people like Bloomberg can make more money while our workers suffer. It's funny how they get the benefit from this kind of shit, but they never take responsibility for the fucking consequences. No, it's always someone else's fault. Fucking assholes. Listen to Richard Wolff, guys. Find Richard Wolff and on Twitter and Facebook and YouTube. That man knows what he's talking about. Give him a listen.
Hong Kong. And this is a guy who I was able to convince should join the international agreement at the Paris Agreement because guess what? They need to be involved. You can cooperate and you can also dictate exactly what they are. When in fact they said we're going to set up a no-fly zone, that you can't fly through our zone. He said, what do you expect me to do when I was over there? I said, we're going to fly right through it. We flew B-1 bombers through it. We got to make it clear. They must play by the rules.
Thank you, Mr.
Period,
President.
period, period.
Senator Warren, same question. Would you allow Chinese firms to build infrastructure?
We have to be able to trust our president because there are a lot of decisions a president makes that you just can't follow every part of that. And that's one of the reasons that we need to see any candidate's taxes. We know that Mayor Bloomberg has been doing business with China for a long time, and he is the only one on the stage who has not released his taxes. He plans to release them after Super Tuesday. It is not enough to be able to say, just trust me on this. We have a president who said he was going to release his taxes after the election and has refused to do this. No, I would not.
Okay. Mayor Bloomberg, would you like to respond?
I got into this race only 10 or 12 weeks ago. We've been working on our tax returns. I've said they'll be out. We probably have another couple of weeks left to go. We're doing it as fast as we can. We've complied with every single requirement for disclosure. And when I was mayor of New York, we had our tax returns out 12 years in a row, and we will do that in the White House.
Actually,
you can find my tax returns online right now.
Can I?
On the question asked. Mr. Steyer.
I released my tax returns.
Yeah.
That was easy to do. But I want to say something
How many years?
about foreign policy. 10 years. I want to say something about foreign policy, which is this. We keep acting as if we're in the 20th century or the 19th century. If you look at the biggest threats to the United States, we're talking right now about coronavirus that cannot be solved within the borders of the United States. We're talking about climate change, which is a global problem where we need U.S. leadership for countries around the world. In fact, Mr. Trump's policy of us going it alone, of America first, of having no values, no allies, and no strategy is disastrous for us. The biggest threat to America right now in terms of our safety of our citizens is climate, and it's time for us to deal with it that way. Every single foreign policy issue is about American leadership and coalition.
New topic, Senator Sanders.
Can I say one word on?
It's in the same theme, sir. You've praised the Chinese Communist Party for lifting more people out of extreme poverty than any other country. You also have a track record of expressing sympathy for socialist governments in Cuba and in Nicaragua. Can Americans trust that a democratic socialist president will not give authoritarians a free pass?
I have opposed authoritarianism all over the world, and I was really amazed at what Mayor Bloomberg just said a moment ago. He said that the Chinese government is responsive to the Politburo. But who the hell is the Politburo responsive to? Who elects the Politburo? You got a real dictatorship there? Of course you have a dictatorship in Cuba. What I said is what Barack Obama said in terms of Cuba, that Cuba made progress on education. Yes, I think, really? Really?
Yes,
Literacy
because there's no
programs
comparing
are bad.
those two
What Barack Obama said
Obama
is
was
they
doing
made
was opening
great
diplomatic
progress
doors.
on
What you were doing
education
is making
and
excuses.
health care. That was Barack Obama.
I talked to
Occasionally-
Barack Obama.
Excuse me. Occasionally, it might be a good idea to be honest about American foreign policy. And that includes the fact that America has overthrown governments all over the world, in Chile, in Guatemala, in Iran. And when dictatorships, whether it is the Chinese or the Cubans, do something good, you acknowledge that.
Hi, Mr.
But you don't have trade love letters
Vice
with them.
President Biden,
This is 2020. We can't
Mr.
be
Vice President.
reliving the Cold War.
Look, Barack Obama was abroad. He was in a town meeting. He did not in any way suggest that there was anything positive about the Cuban government. He acknowledged that they did increase life expectancy, but he went on and condemned the dictatorship. He went on and condemned the people who, in fact,
did
had run that
Bernie.
committee.
Quit
He
taking
also
the clip
made
out of
sure to make it
context.
clear. And by the way, I called to make sure that I was prepared to. I never say in my private conversation with him. But the fact of the matter is, he in fact did not, has never embraced an authoritarian regime and does not now. This
And
man
neither has
said
Bernie
that
Sanders. Quit taking it out of context.
did not condemn what
That
they
is
did.
untrue, categorically untrue.
What did you tell him?
I have condemned authoritarianism, whether it is the people in Saudi Arabia that the United States government
about
has
Cuba,
loved
Nicaragua?
for years, Cuba, Nicaragua. Authoritarianism of any stripe is bad. But
Period.
that is different than saying that governments occasionally do things that are good.
Look,
That's
the-
what
come
Barack
on.
Obama said.
Margaret.
The
that's
only
not-
way we're
Margaret,
going to
could
restore
I-
American
could I, as
credibility.
someone who-
The only way
As the
we
person-
can do
Herr
this
Buttigieg.
is to actually win the presidency. And I am not looking forward to a scenario where it comes down to Donald Trump with his nostalgia for the social order of the 1950s and Bernie Sanders with a nostalgia for the revolutionary politics of the 1960s. This is not about what coups were happening in the 1970s or 80s. This is about the future. This is about 2020. We are not going to survive or succeed, and we're certainly not going to win by reliving the Cold War. And we're not going to win these critical House and Senate races if people in those races have to explain why the nominee of the Democratic Party is telling people to look at the bright side of the Castro regime. We've got to be a lot smarter about this and look to the
Senator
future.
Sanders,
Okay.
Senator Sanders, your response.
Let us be clear. Do we think health care for all, Pete, is some kind of radical communist idea? Do
Glad
we
you brought
think
this up.
raising
Let's talk about
the
that.
minimum
No,
wage to
I'm
a
happy to
living
respond
wage?
to the question
Do we
because
think
this is really
building the
important.
millions of
This is
units
really
of
important.
affordable housing
if you're
that we
gonna
need?
ask that
Do we
rhetorical
think
question, let's
raising
go behind the
taxes
pilfers.
on
Let's talk
billionaires
about this.
is a radical idea?
Let's talk
Do you
about
think
what's radical
criminal
about that
justice
plan.
reform
Senator,
is a
please.
radical
Senator.
idea?
The things you just named
Do we think
are
immigration
things,
reform?
The things
truth
that you
is,
just named are the
Pete,
things
One at a
we
time.
that the
favor,
American
but
people
the way you're
support
talking about
my
doing
agenda.
it is radical
That is
by
why
today's
I am beating
standards.
Trump in virtually every poll
But here's
that
the
has
thing.
done, and
For
why I
example,
will defeat him.
We got to open this up. Universal health care, for
Senator
example.
Klobuchar.
Right, you've
Donald
pointed to that.
Trump's Bernie, Donald Trump's worst nightmare is having someone that the people in the middle who are tired of the insults and the extremes in our politics have someone to vote for. And I was going to
Jesus Christ, nobody cares about your motherfucking concern trolling over politeness and decorum. This whole idea that like people are tired of politicians yelling at each other. Nope. Where's your study on that? Where's your study that all they're looking for is some polite schlup? This is something that the media says that has no factual basis. And
At what we were just talking about, I just think we have a huge choice. Super Tuesday states,
Thank you,
1/3 of
Senator.
America will vote. Do you want to have someone
Thank you,
in
Senator.
charge of this ticket? Could I finish, Margaret?
Well, you're
you
at
want to
time,
have someone in
Senator.
charge of this ticket who wants to put forward $60 trillion in spending, 3 times the
Thank you,
American
Bill.
economy. I don't
Whitaker?
think we do. I think that we can get all those bold, progressive things done without having someone that is so alienating that we're going to turn off the voters that we need to bring
You're
with
going to all
us.
let us
You
go.
have to allow the senator to respond. Senator
Can I
Sanders,
respond?
I'm going to respond to the question that
Amy
Senator
used
Sanders
the word
raised.
alienating. Hey, Amy.
Yes,
My
Bernie?
favorability
Okay, come on.
nationally, I believe, are the highest up here, as a matter of fact. All right? But the point is, the way we
There
are
you
going to
go,
beat
Bernie.
Trump, which is what everybody up here wants, is we need a campaign of energy and excitement. We need to have the largest voter turnout in the history of the United States. We need to bring working people back into the Democratic Party. We need to get young people voting in a way they have never done before. That is what our campaign is about.
Bill Whitaker has the floor.
Vice President Biden,
Yes.
the bipartisan Senate Select Committee on Intelligence report concluded Russia interfered in our last presidential election, and the Obama administration failed to respond forcefully. U.S. intelligence says Russia's at it again. If it is proven that Russia has interfered in the 2020 elections, would you, as president, launch a retaliatory cyber attack?
I would make them pay for it, and I make them pay for it economically. They are engaged now, as I speak, in interfering in our elections. They were engaged, and when in fact we were the last election in 2016 against Hillary, they were. There's no question. This man stood before the whole world, turned to the Russian leader and said, why in God's name would this man ever interfere in our elections? Give me a break. 17 intelligence agencies said he did. When we got the information, we went to the committee in the Senate that's responsible for knowing these issues and dealing with them. We went to Mitch McConnell and said, join us and point out what is happening here. He said, no, we want no part of it. And if we had moved, we didn't have all the information at that time until after the election was over. And so the idea the bipartisan committee said we could have done more, theoretically that's true. But the fact of the matter is we didn't have the information till the end. And so, look, we in fact should be imposing sanctions on Russia now for their interference.
Mr. Steyer.
Look,
who are you so mad at, Biden?
21st
Who are you
century
so mad
warfare is cyber warfare. What we're having is an attack by a hostile foreign power on our democracy right now.
Right.
The question you have to ask is, where's the commander in chief? And let me say this.
We don't have one.
This isn't news. What Vice President Biden said is true. He did stand next to Vladimir Putin. There was a hostile foreign attack on our election last time, and the president sided with the hostile foreign power. That's why I started need to impeach. That's what we have to do. We have to oppose a president who sides with a hostile foreign power that commits cyber warfare against the United States of America. That's where we are. Where are all these patriotic Republicans who wave the flag, but when we're actually under attack, they side with our enemies? It's outrageous. That's why he should have been impeached. They covered it up, and I was years before these people. There's something wrong here. We're under attack, and they're not doing a darn thing about it.
Thank you, Mr. Steyer.
Look,
Major.
the way to deter
Senator Sanders. Senator Sanders, I have a question for you, sir. You're the front runner in this race. You're on the ballot in South Carolina. Mayor Bloomberg, you'll understand that preamble in just a second. If elected, Senator Sanders, you would be America's first Jewish president. You recently called a very prominent, well-known American Israel lobby a platform for, quote, bigotry. What would you say to American Jews who might be concerned you're not, from their perspective, supportive enough of Israel? And specifically, sir, would you move the U.S. Embassy back to Tel Aviv?
Let me just, the answer is it's something that we would take into consideration.
Which would
but
you
here,
take into
excuse me.
consideration?
But here is the point. I am very proud of being Jewish. I actually lived in Israel for some months. But what I happen to believe is that right now, sadly, tragically, in Israel, through Bibi Netanyahu, you have a reactionary racist who is now running that country. And I happen to believe that what our foreign policy in the Mideast should be about is absolutely protecting the independence and security of Israel. But you cannot ignore the suffering of the Palestinian people. We have got to have a policy that reaches out to the Palestinians and the Americans. And in answer to your question, that will come within the context of bringing nations together in the Mideast.
Mayor Bloomberg, would you like to weigh in on that, please?
Well, the battle's been going on for a long time in the Middle East, whether it's the Arabs versus the Persians, the Shias versus the Sunnis, the Jews in Israel and the Palestinians. It's only gone on for 40 or 50 years. Number one, you can't move the embassy back. We should not have done it without getting something from the Israeli government, but it was done, and you're going to have to leave it there. Number two, the only solution here is a two-state solution. The Palestinians have to be accommodated. The real problem here is you have two groups of people, both of who think God gave them the same piece of land. And the answer is to obviously split it up, leave the Israeli borders where they are, try to push them to pull back some of those extra on the other side of the wall where they've built these new communities, which they should not have done that. Pull it back.
Mayor Bloomberg, thank you very much. Senator Warren.
Look, the way we have to think about this is I think we have to start with the values and what has to be protected here. Israelis have a right to security, and the Palestinians have a right to be treated with dignity and to have self-determination. That is a two-state solution. But it's not up to us to determine what the terms of a two-state solution are. We want to be a good ally to everyone in the region. The best way to do that is to encourage the parties to get to the negotiating table themselves. Donald Trump's big mistake is he keeps putting a thumb on the scale on just one side, and that moves the parties further away from working out their own solution here. We need to be an ally by supporting them to come to negotiate to find a lasting peace.
But Senator Warren, just on the question of the embassy, what was your position on that?
It is not ours to do.
Would you move it back?
It is not ours to do. We should let the parties determine
Would
the
you move it back or
capitals.
not? Yes or no?
We should let the parties determine the capitals themselves.
Nora?
I want to turn now to the issue of North Korea, because President Trump has engaged in direct diplomacy, meeting directly with Kim Jong-un. Senator Klobuchar, if you were commander-in-chief, would you meet with the North Korean leader?
I would, but not in the way this president has done it. He literally thinks he can go over and bring a hot dish to the dictator next door, and he thinks everything's going to be fine. He has not done it with our allies. He has literally just hastily called summits and run off. That is no way to do it, and as you can see, North Korea is emboldened. They're still launching missiles. They promised a Christmas surprise that thankfully never happened.
I like how she's trying to pretend she knows dick about North Korea when she couldn't even name the fucking president of Mexico last week. Like, you don't know shit.
Negotiating ourselves back into the Iran nuclear agreement. We should be working with Russia not only to stand up for the protection of our elections and call Vladimir Putin out for what he is, the ruthless dictator that takes down planes, that poisons dissidents, but that also at the same time we have to acknowledge that we should be renegotiating the New START treaty and the other arms negotiations that must happen. This president just likes to do tweets at 4 a.m. in his bathrobe, gets out there and doesn't achieve the results we need. I would meet with him, but I would do it with our allies. I would have clear deliverables, and I would achieve those deliverables.
Mr. Vice President, how would you deal with North Korea?
You don't negotiate with a dictator, give him legitimacy, without any notion whether he is going to do anything at all. You don't do that. Look what happened. He gave this dictator, he's a thug, legitimacy. We've weakened the sanctions around the world against holding us, committing people not to trade anything from oil to parts that they can deal with providing missile technology. And what's happened? It's been weakened. I would be in Beijing. I would be I would be speaking with Xi Jinping. I would be reassigning the relationship between Japan and South Korea, and I would make it clear. I'd make it clear to China, we are going to continue to move closer to make sure that we can, in fact, prevent North Korea from launching missiles to take them down. And if we don't, why am I stopping? No one else stops.
Okay. Okay, sir.
That's my Catholic school training.
Okay.
No. Vice President Biden, you're a gentleman. Good home training. Thank you, sir. Thank
Gentlemen don't get very well treated up here.
Margaret Brennan.
Thank you very much, Nora. This is a question for Mayor Buttigieg. As you know, viewers and voters are participating in this through Twitter. The city of Idlib in Syria is facing an unprecedented humanitarian crisis. The Syrian regime and Russia are targeting schools, bakeries, and hospitals. What would you do as president to push back regime and Russian forces and stop the killing of innocent civilians?
First of all, I stand with the people of Idlib, who are being targeted, as you said, in a brutal fashion by a dictatorship that has already been so brutal for so many years. And this is one of the reasons we have got to change the balance of power in the region, because the president has basically vanished from the stage when it comes to even playing a role in the future there. Turkey, Russia, Iran all have so much more of a say than we do. We don't have to be invading countries to be making a difference, working with our international partners in order to deliver peace and support those who are standing up for self-determination. Now, I want to come back to something, and I promise it relates to international affairs, because Senator Sanders asked me a question earlier. He asked the question of whether health care for everybody is a radical idea. And it's not, which is why I'm for it. Very much in a different way, though. What is a radical idea is completely eliminating all private insurance. And part of how you know it is that no industrialized country has gone that far. He and I both like to talk about Denmark, for example. But even in Denmark, they have not abolished the possibility of private insurance. So this is an idea that goes further than what is acceptable in Denmark, the country, let alone imagining how that's going to fly in Denmark, South Carolina.
Thank you, Mayor. Senator Warren, would you like to respond? What would you do? What would Senator Warren do to stop the mass murder?
I'm sorry.
Same question, what would you do to stop the mass murder in Idlib, Syria?
Look, I think that what we've got to do is we have to provide humanitarian relief. We need to work with our allies on this, but this is not a moment for military intervention. We have got to use our military only when we see a military problem that can be solved militarily. We cannot send our military in unless we have a plan to get them out. So for me, this is about working with our allies. It is about standing with the people who are under enormous pressure right now. This is recognizing what Donald Trump has put us in a terrible box around the world. But the solution is not to use our military. The solution is to use the other tools here.
Thank you, Senator.
Yep.
Well,
we've talked a lot about your policies during this debate. Now we'd like to get a little more personal. I know, Senator Sanders, how much you enjoy that. We're going to ask you when we come back from the break about the words you live by. We're going to give you a couple of minutes to gather your thoughts, and we'll be right back.
This debate has been infuriating so far. Like, the moderators are absolute trash. They just let people lie without any kind of accountability. Especially Bloomberg. Like, the guy was a fucking Republican. Is anybody gonna bring that up? I mean, they talked about how he funded a bunch of Republicans, and yet he just kind of shrugged that off, and no follow-up. None of the... Bernie didn't even mention how hypocritical it is that they've been telling him he's not a Democrat for all this time, perhaps because he didn't want to remind the people that are, you know, so deluded that label matters beyond anything else. But still, like, at least Bernie Sanders was an independent and never paying millions of dollars to awful right-wing assholes. Like, I really am in disbelief about the way that this debate has gone. Like, I'm worried that Bernie didn't do well. It's certainly not good enough to close the gap between him and Biden in the polls. I might be misreading it. Like I said, I'll listen to other people's takes and stuff on Twitter and on the Majority Report tomorrow, or TYT when this is done, to try to get a better understanding. But honestly, I'm mad I spent all this time listening to this crap when, like, I should be doing stuff to be more prepared for work tomorrow morning. Honestly, like, I focused on this instead of other things, and I probably shouldn't have, because there's nothing to gain from it except seeing how goddamn awful the media is again. Like, do they care about losing their relevancy permanently at all? Like, people will stop watching them. Like, everyone. At a certain point, they're just going to get tired of the shitty questions. Oh, God. And now they're going to ask, like, stupid questions at the end. And somehow the crowd will probably find a way to boo Bernie again. They keep booing him over, like, shit that he's obviously correct on. Or, like, who are these people that they have in the crowd? It genuinely makes me suspect of who they have. Come on, man, what the hell? This level is so annoying. Oh my God. I'm just gonna relaunch from here. It says it's like right beneath me, so I'm just gonna drop down. Wish there was a way to slow down the drop so I knew. Oh, of course, it's on like the other side of all this other crap. Should have known it wasn't gonna be that easy. Seriously though, this debate was awful so far. Like, nowhere near enough speaking time for the guy who's in the lead, for God's sake. Like, the media just non-stop trying to prop up fucking Klobuchar. Like, when will they get that nobody wants to hear from her? There's a reason she has no support. Always talking about how much she got done, and like, when everyone knows.
Welcome back to Charleston, South Carolina. This is the final segment of the final debate before the first in the South primary this Saturday and Super Tuesday 1 week from today. Gail?
All right, one final question, candidates, and it's a two-parter. First, I'd like you each to tell us the biggest misconception about you. That's number one. Number two, the South Carolina motto is this: while I breathe, I hope. So outside of politics, in no more than 45 seconds or so, what is your personal motto, your personal belief, your favorite quote that represents you? Mr. Steyer, the biggest misconception, and then your motto.
The biggest misconception about me is that somehow I'm defined by business success and money.
Okay, and your motto?
My motto: every day I write a cross on my hand to remind myself to tell the truth and do what's right no matter what.
All right, thank you, Mr. Steyer. Senator
That's a bit
Klobuchar?
weird and overly religious
I'd say
for me, but-
the biggest misconception is that I'm boring, because I'm not. Then I would say that my motto is the words of one of my political mentors, Paul Wellstone, who's sadly no longer with us. And
She didn't deny physically attacking her own goddamn interns, by the way. This was her moment to be like, I'm not a bad boss. People misunderstand. Nope. She owns that. She threw staplers at her goddamn unpaid
it was there for him, and in
low
his
paid
words, he was
interns.
pursued by grace. And when my mom got divorced and she didn't have a job and she went back to teaching, and that gift of public service got her through. And then when our daughter was born
Senator
and she
Klobuchar,
couldn't
what was your
swallow,
motto?
that
I'm
was
sorry.
my life.
Senator Klobuchar,
Oh, I
what
thought
was
we
your
had a
motto?
minute to answer the question.
No, what was your motto? I'm sorry.
My motto was that politics is about improving people's lives.
Got it. Vice President
Yes.
Biden, biggest misconception?
Pretty good one.
It was a very good one.
Thank
Very
you.
good one.
Thank you.
When you get knocked down, get up, and everyone's entitled to be treated with dignity, no matter what, no matter who they are. Also that everyone should be represented. No one's better than me, and I'm no better than anyone else. The fact is, what we should be doing, we talked about the Supreme Court. I'm looking forward to making sure there's a black woman on the Supreme Court to make sure we, in fact, get every representation. Not a joke. Not a joke. I pushed very hard for that. And
Vice
my
President-
mother's motto was, she said, you know, you're defined by your courage, you're redeemed by your loyalty. I am loyal, I do what I say.
What's the biggest misconception about you, sir?
I have more hair than I think I do.
There's a way to fix that, Senator Sanders.
Misconception.
Yes.
Misconception, and you're hearing it here tonight, is that the ideas I'm talking about are radical. They're not. In one form or another, they exist in countries all over the world. Healthcare is a human right. We have the necessity, the moral imperative to address the existential threat of climate change. Other countries are doing that. We don't need more people in jail, disproportionately African American, than any other country on earth. Not a radical idea. The motto, the saying that moves me the most is from Nelson Mandela. And Mandela said, everything is impossible until it happens. And that means if we have the guts to stand up to powerful special interest, we're doing phenomenally well. If we can bring working people together, black and white and Latino, we can create a nation
All right, Senator
where
Sanders,
all
thank
people
you.
have a good
Senator
standard of
Warren,
living.
Senator Warren.
Well, I suppose one misconception is that I don't eat very much. In fact, I eat all the time because I get teased about this. Look, I never was supposed to be on a stage like this. And the misconception is that I thought I should be president of the United States. No, I got into this because I am a fighter. My motto ties in directly to this. It's Matthew 25. And that is, inasmuch as ye hath done it unto one of these, the least of thy brethren, ye hath done it unto me. For me, this is about how we treat other people and how we lift them up. That is why I am in this fight. That is why I am running to be president. And it is why I will be an effective president.
Thank you, Senator. Mayor Buttigieg.
Well, I think the biggest misconception is that I'm not passionate. I get that I'm kind of level. Some say unflappable. I don't think you want a president who's flappable. But it's precisely because I'm so passionate about the things that are going on in this country that I consider it important to approach all of that with discipline. And my disciplines are guided by the mottos I try to live by, many of which come from Scripture. And just to be clear, I would never impose my interpretation of my religion on anybody. Just as sure as I'm wearing this ring, I'll never let that happen to anybody. But I seek to live by the teachings that say that if you would be a leader, you must first be a servant. And of course, the teaching, not unique to the Christian tradition, but a big part of it, that holds that we are to treat others as we would be treated. And when I think about everything at stake, from racial and economic justice to our stewardship of the climate to the need to heal the sick and the need to heal this country, I seek for those teachings to order my steps as I go through this campaign and as I go through life.
Thank you. Mayor Bloomberg.
Misconception that I'm 6 feet tall. And quote, I've trained for this job for a long time, and when I get it, I'm going to do something rather than just talk about it.
All right. Thank you, candidates. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. That concludes our debate.
No, we have time for one more break, Nora, one more break. Time flies when you're having fun. You're watching the Democratic debate right here on CBS.
Change direction, damn it. No. I hate it. I hate it. I'm going to lose all the time here again. Come on. Really? 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 What? Dude, this part sucks so bad. I can't stand this jump. It's way too exact for this game. Like, I'm in. It's gotta be this big seed down here that launches me up to where I need to be, because it's the only one. There we go, finally. Hopefully it's not too little too late.
Thank you. That concludes our debate. We want to thank the candidates, the moderators, and to you watching at home tonight.
And a reminder that the primary here in South Carolina is this Saturday. Then next Tuesday, of course, Super Tuesday. CBS News will have special coverage.
And our coverage of tonight's debate will continue in a moment from the Spin Room here on CBS and on our streaming news service, CBSN. There will be more about the debate as well on your late local news on this CBS station and first thing tomorrow on CBS This Morning.
I'm getting on a plane right now going to New York. I'll be there.
From all of us here at CBS News, I'm Nora O'Donnell. Good night.
Good night.
This freaking debate sucked. I can't stand the way they treated Bernie Sanders. I do love what he said with his last statement, provided people watched all the way through, because he basically dispelled everything that people threw at him with that one statement, saying that, like, what my ideas are not crazy. We need to get these things to improve the living standard of Americans. So at least he was able to turn the ship around at the end. But I don't feel like he, he didn't speak up enough. And when he did, it almost I honestly feel like they got under his skin and they legit hurt his feelings this time. And you can tell he was upset. Rather than being, rather than having righteous anger on behalf of the American people, he seemed just angry at the circumstance. I don't care, but, might there be some pearl-clutching, church-going black folk in South Carolina that don't read that well? I don't know. We'll have to see. I can't wait to see the polls post-debate to see how this affects everybody. If I had to pick a winner, I don't know. I mean, I'm going to say it was Bernie Sanders because nobody else has anything real to say. It's all just hot air and fucking posturing. The definite loser, once again, is Bloomberg, though. That much I can tell you. Anyway, guys, like and subscribe. I'm going to switch over to TYT and see what their take is. But then I'll have to go to bed soon because I shouldn't have even stayed up this late to start with. All right, y'all. Peace.